How is it now? Oh, great crowd. All right, if everybody could take their seats, we want to get rolling here. Excuse me. All right, thanks everybody for coming tonight. It's going to be a special event tonight with Jesus Garcia presenting. So I want to remind everybody this is a hybrid event, so it's Zoom and in person. So keep your conversations to a minimum for respecting everybody's time here tonight. Couple announcements. We have two events coming up. One is our big spring garden fair coming up on March 16th. It's going to be from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., same as it has been since I've known. And then we also have this tomato up-potting party going on at the Arizona School for the Deaf and the Blind on the 27th of January. Melody Peters is going to be running that. She's like our local tomato expert within the organization. And there's a few spots left to sign up. You can sign up online, I believe. Okay. Okay. Three or four slots left, and we'd like to fill them all. So it's on the 27th of January, and it's 10 to noon. Yeah, 10 to noon. So, do you guys have any questions for me? Because I don't often get up here and hang out. So, if you want to shoot me any questions, we can take a question or two before we get started. If not, I'm going to introduce Jesus Garcia. He's going to do a presentation for us tonight called, I don't know, it's related to the botany.
Well, that summarizes probably that, and
yeah.
Talk about many things.
Yeah, it's called basically, eating your surroundings, basically. How do you live off the environment around you? He was born in Sonora, Mexico, so he's a local, very local native. I would say native Arizona, but not really. Close enough, right? In Sonoran Desert, bachelor's degree in ecology and also evolutionary biology, which I thought was really interesting. He's been with the Desert Museum since 1991, I believe, as a docent and also as a bilingual educator as well. He's currently also on the board of directors for Mission Gardens, which I assume a lot of people in here know about. And he also spends his time teaching natural history programs as well to local schools here in Tucson and also in Sonora, I believe. And one last thing, he's also a director of the Keno Heritage Fruit Tree programs. So he's a busy guy, as far as I can tell. So help me welcome Jesus.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you, Nick.
All right. Well, let's get on it because it's going to be a long night. And bear with me. I'm going to throw at you a lot of information, and bear with me if you are already familiar with some of this stuff. So you probably will absorb a lot more. If this is your first time, it can be a little overwhelming because I'm kind of combining two typical presentations that I do. One of them would be more of the Mission Garden Heritage Crops program that relate to a lot of the stuff that we do at the Mission Garden. But then there's another program that I figure you would be more interested in terms of ethnobiology and ethnoecology, which is really learning about the Sonoran Desert and cultures and foods of the desert. So I'm kind of putting those together in a sense that fits more to what you're doing. If you're interested in gardening, you're interested in growing things, you live here in Tucson, and you putting all those things together. And it can be messy and complicated because a lot of this is really ethnohistory. Yes, we're going to be talking about plants, but more than that, we're going to be talking about history, identity, culture, languages, religion, you name it. And that's what gardening is all about. Because there could be some things that, you want to throw me that thing? She just came in and she said, what about this? Is this sick? What's going on with this? Well, we can spend about 2 hours just talking about a fruit like this. And well, it looks sick. It doesn't look normal. It should look like this. It should look like this. Well, no, maybe it should look the way it should look. It's just that it's not your culture. Okay, so that's going to be the bottom line. Understanding cultures, understanding migration, understanding where you are right now, on top of how many layers of cultures, and understand where you come from. So a lot of this will also, I hope, it will touch you into who you are. Forget about what everybody says or what everybody else is growing or what they tell you to grow. Who are you? Where do you come from? What are the things that make you feel good when it comes to eating something? Originally, we call it tasting your community or tasting history or tasting your surroundings. That's what it is. What can you eat around you that is from here, but you may not be from here. As a matter of fact, probably most of you are not from here. And if you're from Tucson, I know a lot of people who are from Tucson who know nothing about this. You could be from Tucson and still don't know this. Okay? You say, yeah, I'm a native Tucsonan, but I've never eaten saguaro fruit. Well, then maybe you're not native Tucsonan. So that's an example of understanding, because yeah, you might be from here, but you are not connected to this type of things. And so we're gonna just, can we turn the lights down a little bit? I don't know if that might help. It would help to get into, let's see if, is that it? Oh, actually, is that better? Yeah. It's a little better. So, okay. So I have a lot of photos. So I have a lot of images, and I hope we have a little bit of time to talk about these things, because we can spend the rest of the night just with what's in here, and the rest of the box still full. So this comes from a kit that we call the Sonoran Supermarket Kit. This is a kit that we take to schools and teach kids about all the bounties of the Sonoran Desert in terms of native plants. So again, but I'm combining here European plants and just for your benefit to get into the idea. So first of all, many of you say you're not from here, you came from other places, and you probably told your friends at one point, I'm going to the Southwest, and now I live in the Southwest, so greetings from the Southwest. Well, you're not in the Southwest, you're in the Northwest. According to whom? If you come from somewhere else in the United States, you call this the Southwest, but the people who are here, they don't call this the Southwest. I mean, for some of us, it is the Northwest. And imagine for a Native American, what do they call it? I just want to set the tone that we refer to the Southwest, and also looking at Arizona and Tucson, in terms of ecology and the overall ecology of the region, this is just the tip of the iceberg. The core of biodiversity of the Sonoran Desert is in Mexico. Arizona is just the tip of the iceberg. When it comes to whether you talk about geology, ecology, geography, language, religion, no matter what aspect of the Sonoran Desert you want to consider it, this is just the tip of the iceberg, southern Arizona. The rest of it is a little bit of California, Baja California, and Baja California Sur. Most people don't know that there are 3 Californias. There's actually 4 Californias. There's California where Disneyland is. There's Baja California, one state, and then Baja California Sur, another state. And I just learned that there's a California in Pennsylvania. There's a little town called California in Pennsylvania. But that's important to get an idea. And then, of course, the rest of the state of Sonora here. And that's the reason the Desert Museum is actually called the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum. So as he mentioned, for the last 25 years, I've been working at the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum, teaching natural history of the Sonoran Desert and bringing live animals. It's been a fascinating trip to imagine bringing skunks, porcupines, snakes, scorpions, tarantulas, hawks, parrots to almost every school in the region. Anybody who was here in the 1960s? No? Do you remember Hallgrass? Well, I've had the privilege of being Hallgrass for the last 25 years. Okay, that's a unique opportunity. Hallgrass was a TV personality in the 1960s, and he used to bring animals from the Desert Museum to the schools, and you guys were little kids probably, or you had, you know, in the schools, it's starting probably in the late 50s, I believe. But that's been my job overall. But in general, my passion has been the connection between humans and the environment. Yes, protecting and conserving animals is very, very important. But my belief is that animals do not need conservation. And even plants don't need conservation if we leave them alone. So who needs conservation? Humans. We are the ones who need conservation. We need to understand the situation and then do something about it. If we leave the animals and plants alone, they're going to be just fine. But we tend not to do that. So this kind of brings the picture of just understanding where we are here. So the typical Sonoran Desert scenery, this is the Arizona uplands near the Tucson Mountains here. Typical, you have a saguaro forest, and it's very unique if you're not from here. But the farther south you go, the more complex it gets because more columnar cacti. There's at least 6 different columnar cacti in the Sonoran Desert, and there are some that are even taller and bigger than saguaros south of the border. They're called cardones. At the same time, that complexity of biodiversity is equally matched by the tapestry in the diversity of people who have lived in this area for millennia. When you get into the archaeology stories here in Tucson, you learn that, particularly now you go to the Mission Garden and visit that. How many of you have never been to the Mission Garden? Okay, you need to go. So that is a place that basically is the beginning to start to understand these complexities and this diversity of humans and agriculture. And archaeological evidence tells us that people have been cultivating this land for more than 4,000 years. It's being pushed almost now to 5,000 years now. Cultivating, not just gathering and foraging, or no, cultivating these floodplains for more than 4,000 years. So it gives you an idea the complexity of the different human and languages and cultures of the region. And that's, of course, a whole other story that we can spend a long time talking just about that. But here gives you an example where Tucson is, the Tohono O'odham. It's the primary tribe that lives in this area. And Tohono O'odham means people of the desert. And they often just people say, oh yeah, well, just the O'odham, they're all over the place. But within the reservation and within the region, which is many cases now in another country and in all different places, there are several different groups. There's some called the Hiashed O'odham, which are the Sand O'odham. Then you have the Sovaipari in the Santa Cruz River. Then you have the Tohono O'odham, and then you have the river O'odham. They're called the Akimed O'odham. So among themselves, sometimes they don't even communicate among themselves. So that goes to show you how complex it is just within one particular group. And the rest of them are connected. There's a lot of the languages around here that are from the same root, the Uto-Aztecan family of languages in general, most of them, except the Seris in Sonora, which live by the coast, and then you have Apaches and Navajo, which belong to a whole different family. So once you understand the complexities of the past and start seeing that prior to European arrival, it wasn't rosy here. It was complicated as well. There were wars, and there were massacres, and there were displacements, and there were migrations, and there were everything we're having now. So there's nothing new. And for me, the relationship between those humans and their environment defines their culture, because that defines their food, that defines their language, that defines their everyday life. So that's very important when language is attached to culture. And all that is attached to the land, is attached to the resources. So that big word that some of you probably already are familiar with, and some of you probably have never heard that word before, ethnobotany. What does ethnobotany mean? So there's like many Greek or Latin words. Happen to be a compound word. There's 2 words. So the easy one is botany. So we say botany refers to plants. But ethno throws people off because that refers to ethnic or ethnic group. So it's simply referring to people. So in other words, ethnobotany is the relationship between people and plants. That's it. What relationship do we have to plants? Well, it's pretty huge. Raise your hand if you ate a plant today. I expect every hand to go up. You should see when you haven't eaten any plants today. You can't remember? Okay, well, Did you have coffee this morning? Tea? Oh, so you are that little fourth grader. You are the little fourth grader who just says, I haven't had anything. Lemon water, okay. What about bread, tortillas, cereal, anything, even a Twinkie? Well, there you go. So anyway, so you'll be surprised when you ask this question to fourth and fifth graders, just nobody. But now the crazy thing is, before the day ends, I guarantee you're going to eat more plants. And tomorrow and the rest of your life, you're going to continue eating plants. Sometimes, unfortunately, they don't look like plants, but they are plants. And that's the relationship that we have. So that relationship goes with food, is the first relationship that we have with plants. The next thing we have is medicine. Whether you're drinking coffee, get some caffeine to get a caffeine fix, or tea for a stomach ache or something like that. So yeah, we can, many of the plants that we don't know that are actually embedded in our medicine that we get at Walgreens. If you took an aspirin for a headache, the active ingredient that was originally taken out of a plant, and many, many other ones. Now, of course, we can make synthetic medicines, but they came from an original plant source, the chemical components and the formula of it. So medicine is very important. And one fascinating thing is, think for a moment, when does medicine becomes food and when does food become medicine? So because, you know, if you eat good food, you don't need a whole lot of medicine. Meaning you don't need to go to the pharmacy. You don't need to go to the doctor. You don't need. So how do those two words change in there? Another one that is quite complex, and I have a few samples in here too, is tools and utensils. And that would include everything else that we do, our material culture, whether it's shelter, clothing, toys, instruments, weapons, you name it. If you are wearing a shirt made out of cotton, you are wearing a plant. Okay? And it just goes on and on and on. Of course, many things are synthetic now and plastic and other things, but not too long ago, these tables would have been made out of wood. Those bookcases that are made out of wood, the doors are still made out of wood. This is, it seems like it's actually solid in cement, but you have a pencil, you have other things. We depend on plants in many ways, whether it's instruments and things like that. So to make it then a little more generalized, let's just kind of go away from ethnobotany a little bit, and let's go a little broader. Can we call this ethnobiology? What is the difference now when you say, instead of ethnobotany, just with plants, ethnobiology, the relationship between humans and living things? It not only have to be plants. Do we have a relationship with plants? Yes. Do we have a relationship with animals? Yes. I'm not talking your pets, I'm talking the ones you eat. We eat a lot of animals. Okay, so, and what about if we make it a little more broad? What about ethnoecology? Now is a relationship between humans and the environment. That would be living things and non-living things. What kind of relationship do we have with non-living things? It's quite extent. I mean, whether you go back to ancient times or to the present, this is a non-living thing, and we made it. It was made by humans. So that's an example. So, and anyway, so just a quick little image here of probably, 2,000 years ago, Native Americans here trying to channel rainwater to grow crops. And we have plenty of evidence of that at the Mission Garden, throughout the Santa Cruz River Valley. There's tons and tons of evidence. It's absolutely fascinating how people were utilizing the resources, whether it's the floodplain or the water, etc. There are plenty of sites throughout the Santa Cruz River, from Mexico all the way to the Colorado River, where the evidence, people sometimes is buried 3 meters below the ground level, but including footprints from 3,500 years that was found, that were found right here in Sunset Road, and you could actually go see them. So that type of thing has been happening here for a long, long time. And of course, this is at the Mission Garden. We find potted church that obviously people have been, they broke and they got mixed into that soil. That goes to show you, right at the base of a mountain, you have this this place that was and has been cultivated continuously for all this time. That's what is fascinating. So that the concept of this, I would call that ethnogeology, wouldn't it be? Because we're using soil to make things. Or more so, what about this? If you find things like that, there's a human modifying a rock. So that's ethnogeology, wouldn't it? I mean, that's kind of going far-fetched, but that's something to keep an eye. So when we think about a mountain, just as an icon here downtown Tucson, why all these things are happening there? Where that's where Tucson began. That's the beginning of Tucson. That's the origins. We call it Tucson's Origins Park, which is part of the whole concept that is being utilized right now as a flagship to create the beginnings of Tucson. Whether you go back thousands of years or whether you go back even to the period of the Spanish period, to understand that humans have been revolving around the river, around a mountain. And I don't want to go into many more details, but that area, it's really the beginning of Tucson, because that's when the Europeans that first arrived here, they found Native Americans, Tohono O'odham, living in there. Why were they living there? Because there was plenty of water. The Santa Cruz River had a lot of water. There was actually more like a spring. And the word Tucson. Raise your hand if you know what the word Tucson means. Okay, 2 people, okay. So where does that come from? It's certainly not English, and it's certainly not Spanish, even though we say Tucson in Spanish, but that's not either the origins. The word is Shukshon. Shukshon is 2 words. Shuk means black, Shon means spring, or spring at the base of the Black Mountain, or spring, or black water, or black area spring. And that's where water was permanently available all year long. So simply, people will be living there. And that's the reason people have been living there for a long time, even to this day. So that's an example of how a geological formation, in this case, the bedrock coming out of a mountain. Okay, see a mountain right here. Remember where it is. Here's the Santa Cruz River. If you look at a mountain right now, it's a mountain that's like this. And you see it, and it ends right at Mission Garden. That's what you see. But that profile of the mountain continues down all the way to the center of the river, about 300 feet below. And the river coming through, guess what the river encounters? Encounters bedrock. Water comes to the surface. That is a very typical geological pattern that you find throughout many places, from Phoenix in the Salt River to Tucson to many different places. That bedrock pushing the water, the underwater water up, creates a spring, and it creates a living environment for whoever, animals, plants, and people. And that's the origins of Tucson. And you can find that pattern repeating all over this dry desert. So that's an example of, and as we move into, this you can really see here, but again, this would be Sonora, this is Arizona. This is the historic, generalized, again, European perspective of what people call La Pimería Alta, the upper Pima lands. Most of it is in Sonora, and I mean, a big chunk is in Sonora, a big chunk is in Arizona, because this would be the border. When you look at the names of all the different O'odham communities, and of course, this is a typical blind map that in the US, they omit the Mexican side, where all the O'odham towns are. But if you start analyzing all the different names, whether in English or Spanish or in O'odham, they all have water names. They all relate to water. Black water, green water, high water, low water, shallow water, deep water, white water, little well, big well, cover well, open well. Is on and on and on about water. And it makes sense. You've heard that cliche story that the Inuit in Alaska, they have 50 words for snow. You've heard that. It's a typical anthropological kind of cliche story. Well, the O'odham have 50 or if not hundreds of words for water in the desert. And it's the same thing, because it's the most important resource to live there. And it's abundant, believe it or not. Not anymore, in some cases, but that would have been the case. This was an exhibit at the Desert Museum in the 1950s and early 60s, and eventually disappeared. But it was a typical Tohono O'odham grass house with a wattle, which was a ramada, with a tinajera, with a clay pot, and all, basically the outdoor kitchen. People lived here outdoors. I want you to put this into perspective. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of this understanding of this land It's about understanding where you come from, what your background is, where you come from, or your family, or your ancestors, versus the people who lived here, versus the ancestors of the people that live here. It's important to put that into perspective. Going back in time, going back prior to European arrival, this is how people live here. But look at that little house, no air conditioning and almost no windows. And like, how can you live in there? Well, they didn't go in there all the time. They live outside all the time. They probably went in there when it was cold and raining. And that was it. The rest of the time, you live and sleep and eat outside. Many Native Americans people to this day still live like that in Mexico and even in places here in the US. So there are a lot of folks came from the reservation and built this exhibit to demonstrate how they did it. And here's when it's kind of interesting to think of the ethnobotany aspect of things. So you look at this house, okay, well, what are these poles made out of? What are these branches made out of? What are these branches for the fence? What are these poles for the fence? What are these grasses? What are the plants that are being used? And as an ethnobotanist, you can go and start naming every single one of them. And you really understand the land. What are the plants? How are they used? When you collect them, how do you process them? What do you do with them? And that's the simple concept of living with the land. Inside that little haiski, that little grass house, there was a window that you could see inside. And inside, there were like a few materials like baskets, pots, and materials that people would have been using in an everyday life, from pottery for water and wine and seeds, you name it, baskets. Notice the baskets are not particularly decorated like the ones you see right now, because that was not the point. They were utilitarian. They were used every day. They were not for tourists, as they are now. So this is an example, I mean, a table made out of the local materials, whether it was saguaro ribs, mesquite, bear grass, creosote, whatever was available. So nowadays, this is what we see. We think that's the Native American culture, when you make these beautiful, very expensive baskets that you buy and you put it up in the shelf and you don't let anybody touch it. And it's kind of a shame when you think about all the work that has been put into that, and you just consider it a piece of art. And no, but they were used for cooking and eating. I've seen baskets that are burnt, and because you use them every day, and then you break them, and then you fix them. Okay, so nowadays this is the situation. They realize, okay, you want a fancy basket? I'll make you a fancy basket, and you're going to buy it, and you're going to pay this price for it. And this is what has become that commodity of tourism, or a culture that does not use these baskets the way they were meant to be. Okay, so think about that relationship that we have with the past and the cultures that live here. This is just, you probably have seen this before, those of you who have been at Manso and other places. We can spend the rest of the night just talking about this calendar. For a moment, think about a life. Think about your life without January through December. Imagine that doesn't exist. Think for a moment a time or a concept without Monday through Friday. Think about a life without 8 to 5. Just for a moment, think about it. We can't even think about it because it's embedded in our culture, in our mind, in our Western Judeo-Christian mentality. So if you look at Native American life prior to Europeans arriving here, life was basically defined by what was going on outside. When was spring? What things were available? What beans were available to harvest? What fruits you could harvest? What things you need to do to have the environment dictated, because you were living outside. The environment dictated your activities and the things that you need to do. Okay, so you had to live with the environment in a much closer. Right now, if it snows and rains, okay, turn the TV on and order some takeout and you can get whatever and it's fine. Life is good. Okay, but that's a little artificial if you think about it, a way of living. Okay, so we had for many years this wonderful lady. She died many years ago, Juanita Hill. She actually trained a lot of Desert Museum staff for many years in the process of collecting saguaro, harvesting saguaro, processing the saguaro. We would bring kids, as a matter of fact, many kids, if you probably remember, as kids, you probably were taken into field trips and you were gone to her camp. And when I came at the Desert Museum, she had already, I think she was still alive, but she was very elderly. She passed away, and then her granddaughter continued for all the decades that I worked with her until she died 2 years ago, Stella Tucker. And then now we have the next generation, the third generation of the family harvesting saguaro every year in the summer. So for many of you who are winter visitors, well, that doesn't apply to you because it's from mid-May to mid-June, the end of June, when the temperatures are 120 degrees out there. That's when the best time is to collect saguaro. And if you're not willing to do that, then you're not going to have it. Okay, and it makes a huge difference. How many of you have ever tasted saguaro fruit? Okay, so that $20 a bottle. Okay, wow. Where do you get it? It wasn't saguaro. That's prickly pear. Like the little market, they actually have saguaro syrup. Actually, because normally they don't sell it. It's typically prickly pear what they sell sometimes. But if you have saguaro syrup, yeah, it can be very tiny. I mean, it takes a long time to do it. But the question is, your homework should be, you can go and collect it yourself. You know, so whether you have a saguaro in your neighborhood or in your yard, or your neighbors have it, or even just hiking around, you can actually taste it. It's legal to go and get one. You cannot go with a bucket and bring a whole bunch of them unless you're Native American and you have special permission. But you can be hiking and pick up saguaro, you know, get the fruit down and eat it. That's no problem. That's actually legal. You can do that. You ask rangers, and it's not like, you know, you're going to be bringing them and sell them or anything else. If you can, or pick them off the ground. You actually walking in the desert during the ripening season, you find the fruit that just dropped in the ground, perfectly fine. You can enjoy it and understand that sweetness of the desert provides at that time. So it's a good way to connect to the desert. So yes, it's a complicated process. You know, you have the flowers, you wait for the fruit to ripen, and then it gets knocked down into baskets or in the ground. You collected it. You then process it, which is quite elaborate process. You boil it. You separate the seeds, separate the fibers, reduce it again. We're talking hours of cooking here and simmering until you get a wonderful syrup that will rival any maple syrup from anywhere in the Northeast. So that is a syrup from here, from the desert, from the hardest time of the year. But of course, most of us do not have the time to do that, unfortunately, because we have other things to do. But that's how people lived here, and that's how they connected to the desert. And of course, prickly pear is the same thing. You find, okay, well, where do I find prickly pear? They're all over the place. And what do? What are the processes to do it? What is the best practices to do it? How do you collect it? Keep in mind this, because later we'll talk about, look at the spines on this prickly pear. This is the native Opuntia Engelmanni prickly pear, and they typically ripen in August. And again, the process requires quite a bit of attention to learn how to do it, and it's essentially quite easy. You just need to know how to do it. We do have a lot of classes at the Desert Museum, and other organizations have classes in how to harvest the fruit, how to prepare it. Your front yard might be full of these things, and you just ignore it every day you walk in and out. Same thing with cholla buds. Cholla buds, here's the same lady harvesting the cholla buds, which is the unopened flowers. If the flowers are already open, it's too late. You need to harvest them when they are unopened. So that's the reason they're called buds. And you can dehydrate them and keep them for months and months. And then you rehydrate them again and you eat them, or eat them fresh in the season. So yes, they are full of spines, but you need to clean the spines. And you need to learn how to clean the spines, and it's actually easy. You just need to know how to do it. Then use ham and olive oil with garlic and onion, and you have a wonderful meal with the most rich calcium than any other meal that you can get in the store by harvesting the fruits that you can have in your backyard. So speaking of probably the three most important legumes that we have here in the Sonoran Desert will be mesquite. And I have some samples of mesquite beans right here. If you haven't gotten, I highly recommend get the Eat Mesquite book and more. The latest edition is quite expensive. Highly recommend it to get it. If you want to get acquainted with how do you incorporate native foods into your regular diet that you have, get that book. It's expensive, but it's very good. Not only you're supporting local organizations like Desert Harvesters and the people that have been working on it for a long time, the latest edition, many of us collaborated in it, and there's way more than mesquite. That's the reason it's called Eat Mesquite and More. Highly recommend it. There's all kinds of things going on. You can even go to the co-op and buy mesquite flour right now, or San Javier, etc. So the other legume would be palo verdes. Palo verdes, and I actually have two. I have the yellow palo verdes and the blue palo verdes. And why do I have them right now? Because I usually keep them in the freezer for this occasion. So you can actually, they're from last season, but keep them frozen and then just take them out for demonstrations and you can have a chance to taste them. So there is a competition between palo verdes and ironwood about which one tastes better or more like edamame. If you're into edamame, really, believe me, I mean, and think about where the soybeans come from. Where were they cultivated? By whom and how many people? How long it take to get them here? And you pay all that much money at the Japanese restaurant that you want to eat it. Where you can, when you have an ironwood tree right in your yard, that you continue to ignore every single day. And I do have ironwood seeds in the fresh state. They've been boiled for about, I don't know, like 10 seconds or something like that, like blanched, I guess that's the word. And I think I might have some dry ones too, but this is probably the best one with a little bit of salt. Cannot imagine how good that is. So those would be just the most important three legumes that are abundant all over the place. Other things like ocotillo. Ocotillo, you just see it as the ornamental plant. There's always have ocotillos because they're so beautiful and the hummingbirds come in here and that's it. But there's a lot more to that. That little grass house, a lot of the fences that people make for their chicken coops, for their animals, for their gardens, was made out of ocotillo. And in this case, for instance, the Seri Indians in Sonora, in the spring, when, you know, springs are usually droughts here. It's also important to know when the rainy seasons are to this region. So you would get the flowers, like the whole inflorescence, put it in a jar with water, put it overnight in the refrigerator, and the next morning you have a power drink. It's not like the ones you buy at the store, of course, but it has nectar, it has pollen, and probably a few bugs in there, and you have a nutritious water that it would be much, much better tasting than if you were just drinking regular. And a little bit of protein as well with some of the bugs. So I have another very unique plant here that is not found here in Tucson, but they're only 45 minutes away. Acorns. Acorns, this is an example of a plant that is as local as it can be. It's literally at Molino Basin. It's just halfway up Mount Lemon. And this is something that I grew up with. To me, this is a taste of my child. I grew up eating these things. If you come from the East, you come from California, you come from other places, and you say, oh, eating acorns, you don't do that. No, because they are just about most of the species that we have in the Americas are really horrible. They are really bitter. They have tons and tons of tannins. So some of them, I mean, almost poisonous. I mean, you would probably poison yourself if you try to eat them because they are so bad. But you know that many Native Americans had to leach them. You had to do through this elaborate process to grind them, leach them in baskets, and take all the tannins out, and then you could eat it as flour or other things. Well, these, you don't need to do that. These are considered sweet. And the flavor, and I'll have you taste them as well, they taste like cacao. Like if you're eating raw, natural cacao, that's what it is. Very unique.
Which oak is that?
Emery oak. This is Quercus emery. And it's only found in Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and Chihuahua. That's it. Bellotas, yes. All oaks are bellotas because that's what the bellota is really the name of the fruit. But yes, typical. If we say bellotas, we're referring just to that. Now, if you're talking about a blue oak, Arizona oak, or any of the other species of oaks that also have bellotas, but we call them bellotas de cochi. We call them pig bellotas because only pigs would eat them, unless you leach them and all that. But these, you literally get them on the tree and eat them, and I'll show you how to eat them as well. So, because that's a cultural experience. So really quick, to get into, this is a small exhibit at the Desert Museum, which we also try to incorporate like a little backyard garden. So we have a fig, we have quinces, pomegranates, we have little gardens and different things going on there. The ramada representing all the different woods and plants, agave, ocotillo, saguaro. Sort of like all the incorporation of the native plants that are used for shelter. A lot of the ethnobotany presentations, we do them here, and we're in the process of changing that even as we speak, because always keeps evolving. Then we have probably the most fascinating story that I can also talk a little bit about this later on, is the story of domestication. And it's not just corn. Here's when things get really, really fascinating. You're used to going to the store, and it will not be this one, but it will be corn that looks like this, roughly, pretty large corn. Occasionally, you may find some Indian corn that looks like that, and it's pretty big. But corn wasn't always like that. Corn was a wild grass, okay? It was a wild grass that was also manipulated by humans. So we have a few little garden samples, including at the Mission Garden, we have some of those as well, where we have the original corn, teosinte. So I had this example just to show you the diversity of corn, not only in size and color, and obviously flavor, and also seasons of growth and varieties, whether it's popcorn or not, but also ears of corns that are not dwarf. That's how they are. That's the normal size, including corns that are flat like that, only have kernels in one side. And this is an ear of corn. This is the original teosinte. This is what corn comes from. This is an actual ear of corn, and it has sometimes 3, sometimes 4 little kernels, no cob. This is a wild grass. When it ripens, it drops, and it drops these little brown triangular seeds. That is the original corn. What happened from there to here? Humans came into the picture.
What is Zia maize?
That's Zia maize is really the overall. It's more for the latest varieties that have been domesticated. I forgot the Latin name for teosinte, but I think it's the same genus actually. And the story is, well, that many scientists still don't agree whether that domestication happened naturally or it was fully manipulated by humans, or both. Possibly, or some animals, very likely. But to this day, this corn and the corn that we know today cannot grow without humans. It's totally interdependent from humans. So that's full domestication. And the same story goes with everything else that we eat. The apples that you eat, the pears that you eat, the grapes that you eat, the bananas that you eat, every single thing that you get at the supermarket is domesticated beyond their means. In some cases, unfortunately, we've turned them into candy. We've turned fruits into candy. Not all fruits should be, we judge fruits by their sweetness. And if it's not sweet, it's not good. I'll show you in a second some samples. So we have lost that idea of that some fruits should not be sweet. They should be sour or bitter. But we have lost that concept of understanding that diversity. Talk about it in just a moment. So here's 60-day corn, which is this one. This is the autumn 60-day corn. This typically will grow from seed to bearing fruit within 60 days. It's a variety that has been domesticated here by the autumn, so it's adapted to these conditions. And so the concept, why do we have fruit trees in the desert? We're gonna dive into the concept of now getting into the European aspect of things. So here's the little garden at the Desert Museum. Oh, it's a nice little big, beautiful black fig, black mission fig. And it's amazing that it shows you that you don't have to have special soil. It's literally soil around the Desert Museum where it's growing. And with care and particularly water, things happen. So let's talk about the concept of Europeans arriving to this part of the world. So as I mentioned at the beginning, keep in mind who you are, where you come from, what you're here, what are the things that you want to do, and why some things don't make sense or why some things make sense. But overall, you have to put into perspective these layers of culture. We talked about Native Americans living here thousands of years ago, and probably among themselves, replacing, some cases, either dominating pieces of land and resources one after another, which is totally well understood now. Native Americans didn't live in this wonderful world as many people think. They were killing each other, and they were replacing each other's culture and other languages, and you name it. And the strongest probably had the most resources, and you can go from Tierra del Fuego to Alaska, and those patterns are the same. There's no difference. But in this part of the world, we have clearly defined all those layers, and we can study them. And one example would be what happened when Europeans arrived here. Well, now we can see how then the positive sides and the negative sides of the European encounters, what things were good, what things were bad. We don't want to get into those details, but this is the concept of understanding a whole new mentality, new religions, new languages, new crops came into the picture. So what happened to the Native American thought and Native American culture, Native American, yes, some lived together for a little while, but little by little, one culture started dominating the other one to this very day. Okay, so just to jumping back a little bit, learn a little bit of geography. So think about the concept of where the deserts in the world are. So sometimes if you're into gardening and you say, well, why can't I grow this? Or I want to grow this. Well, you can grow anything you want if you put your mind to it. Sometimes it's more difficult than others. But think about the concept of how these deserts are found around the world. Look at this. There is a pattern to the deserts of the world. They're not just all over the place. If you look around the world, there is a certain latitude where most of the deserts are in general. So that is kind of an interesting story. I just like to talk about that because really it refers to, here's the equators, then you have the Tropic of Cancer, and there are these places here, these big bands that are called coarse latitudes. So everybody knows that latitude is there's degrees north of the equator and degrees south of the equator. So when you say latitude, you want to refer to either north latitude or south latitude. And there is a pattern, very clearly defined. I don't know if I want to get into this, but I make this up, okay? I call it the northern latitude attitude. Let's see if you can stay with me for a second. And again, feel free to, question it or whatever, but these are my own observations. Think about over the world. You can look at countries, you can look at cities, towns, and often the northern, of course, if we are in North America, for instance, northern locations seem to be better off than southern locations, economically speaking. Think about northern part of the United States is better off, wealthier than the southern part of the United States. Will you agree with me, kind of in general? Okay, think about, you can pick any other country. Think of Northern Europe versus Southern Europe. Think of Northern Tucson and Southern Tucson. Think of Northern Mexico and Southern Mexico. Think of Northern Sonora and Southern Sonora. Think of Northern Arizona and Southern Arizona. There is a disparity in wealth in general. I'm just generalizing, but it's a pattern. And if you go to South America, guess what happens? People in the higher latitudes in the south are wealthier than people as you go. Have you thought about that?
No.
Okay, well, now you have. So why is that? I don't know, but here's my theory. Here's my theory. If you come from higher latitudes, think about where you come from, okay? Often, and you hear this all the time, and I've heard it all my life. Oh, these Mexicans are so lazy. Oh, these people are so lazy. Oh, the people on the coast are so lazy. Like they don't prepare for things. They don't do anything. They don't get ready for things. They don't. And what's happening here, there's a lot of people from northern latitudes coming to live here in this southern latitude with their attitude from the north. And they want to continue to run things the way they are run in their latitude. Now, people who live in the coast, you say, well, why don't they prepare for the winter? They don't need to because there's no winter. If you go farther south into the equator, food is falling off the trees. You don't have to prepare for food. You don't need to prepare firewood for the winter because there's no winter. Okay, that's an example. So, and if you come with a northern latitude to tell people what they should do, and that's the concept that you hear all the time here. Europeans, Spanish Europeans, and Anglo-Europeans saying Indians are lazy because they don't do anything. They don't prepare, they don't fix their houses. Their houses are falling apart. Well, if they fall, they build it up in 2 days again. Okay. I just want to throw that in there, just the concept of understanding how these things work. But now let's go back to the geography here. Why are these horse latitudes important when it comes to whether you have a desert, whether you have an arid environment like the one we have here, or whether you have a wet environment, whether you have more rain or less rain, or more evapotranspiration, when you have more humidity in the air so plants can live better instead of this dryness that kills them. So yes, it had to do with trade winds. It had to do with winds from the equator going up into the atmosphere. They travel south, they fall again. They travel north and they fall again. And it rains a lot in this area, except up to this area that is called the horse latitudes. Why the heck do they call it horse latitude? Well, here's some of the theories. There are some theories. When the first Europeans are traveling in these caravels across the ocean, they were bringing all kinds of things. They were bringing plants and food and animals, horses and pigs and chickens. There are some stories that every once in a while they would throw an animal overboard. I don't know why they would do that. Maybe the animal was sick or they couldn't eat it for whatever reason, but I would have eaten it. But they throw the animals overboard, either because they were sick or they couldn't eat them. And then another boat coming later, they would find the animal floating in the very same spot. In other words, there were no movements of currents in that area. So that's when they knew they were in the horse latitudes. They were in this just about 32 degrees north or 32 degrees south of the equator because there's no currents, no trade winds, and their boats would get stuck because there were no wind. And they had to sometimes get stuck for weeks until winds came so we can push them out. So that's one story that the horses were, once they left, the horse would stay there and another boat would come and find those horses floating in there. Whatever. That's one story. The other one, which is kind of fascinating, is this one. That whenever they got stuck in a horse latitude because there was no wind, they would bring the horses with these braces, bring them out of the, imagine for 2 months, a horse stuck in a little place, traveling in a boat. And they would get him out with a hoist, get him out, and then put him out of the boat and let them swim. Either for exercise or potentially to help propel the boat a little bit. Some people say, which I don't really buy that, but that's an idea that they would get him out and let the horse exercise and let swim when there was nothing else to do. Anyways, for whatever all those reasons, to this day, you hear the word horse latitude, and it refers to those 32 degrees north, 32 degrees south, which happens to correspond with the deserts as well. And the Sonoran Desert is considered a horse latitude desert. There are other deserts that we call the rain shadow deserts that, for instance, part of the Sonoran Desert here, the rains that come from California, they stop at the mountain there. Nothing comes this way. That's a rain shadow desert. And there's plenty of those as well. Anyway, so let's kind of come back to Tucson. Let's come back to Europeans arriving to this part of the world. That happens in the late 1600s. Okay, first encounter of Native Americans. This would be the Tucson Valley, the Catalina Mountains. That would be the Mission Garden. That would be the San Agustin Mission and the Presidio. That was it, early 1700s. And what happens at that time? So a whole transformation. This is a real photographs from the 1800s of the same area. Here's a mountain. Here's the Tucson Valley. That little dusty Mexican town there is Tucson. Okay, barely see it. I have a better picture to show that. And that shows you that the vast majority of this valley was agriculture. Totally dependent on agriculture. Everything that was eaten and produced here was local, and it was here. And all these people, again, think about that. Prior to that, this is late 1800s, just about the time when this became the United States. Now here we have one more replacement of another culture, now coming to suppress the Hispanic culture that had already been dominant for several hundred years. Now we have a third component pushing another culture down, okay? So prior to that, this was Mexico. And prior to that, this was New Spain. And prior to that was Native American. All over. So putting all those things into perspective, so we have what the modern Tucson looks like now. We still have now the Mission Garden. There's a mountain. This is what it looks like now. All that wonderful agricultural land, no longer there. There's the Catalina Mountains and the city, and etc. So These are some of the crops that have been an icon at the Mission Garden from the beginning. So a lot of the research when I started the Guinea Trees Project with a couple of people and advisors here to figure out what the Europeans brought that might still be around. What are the crops, along with the cattle and sheep and chickens and other things, what are the crops that they brought that could potentially still be around in the region? So looking at literature from Father Kino himself, all the different Jesuits, church records and everything else that we could find, what are the gardens, the orchards that were still in those missions that we could potentially get still evidence, actual germplasm from those from times, and we found it. It's all over the place. We started within Tucson and outside Tucson, Sonora, Baja California, California, New Mexico. We continue to find varieties like the Mission Black Fig, quinces. If you never had a quince before, pass this around. These are the leftovers right now at the Mission Garden. I collected them this morning. Pass them around and smell that. Pass them around, just smell that. This is a quince. This is the end of the season right now. That smell is so unique. You're not going to find that anywhere in the supermarket. Occasionally, some stores may have things from California and other places, but this is something that has been here for hundreds of years. I grew up with that. That is a taste of my childhood. Since the moment I remember, I've been eating quinces every year. Just eat them, just like you would eat anything. Yes. This variety. If you come from the East Coast, you come from Northern Europe, and you know about quinces, you do not eat them like that. Because this variety is a variety that has been adapted to this region, brought by people who knew what they were doing to this part of the region, and this, you can actually eat them like an apple. At the end, if we have time, we can cut one open and you can. It's an apple or a pear, but it's neither. It's close related. Yes, exactly. It's totally related to apple. You can graft pears and apples into quince, and they are totally comparable. So it's a prunus. And then we have pomegranates that if you go to any supermarket, you're not going to find this. These are ugly pomegranates that you will not dare to buy that in the supermarket. This is probably the most delicious pomegranates you ever tasted. They are sweet. They are soft-seeded. No, these are even red. These are not white. The white ones are, these will be white ones. These are whites. These are reds. And they are octubreñas and agosteñas. They're the ones that ripen in August. They're the ones that ripen in October. And these are varieties that just simply you have to find them in local ranches and homesteads and places like that. But those are things that we have been working on. Then this is again when the culture comes to, when it comes out to where you're from and where you come from. If I pull this and I offer you this, you're thinking margaritas already, but this is a lime. But this is a sweet lime. This lime tastes like an orange. And this orange tastes like a lime. Most people don't know what to do with that. Not only with the concept of seeing them, more so when you taste them. I can tell you, my gosh, these are the same name. These are different ripeness levels right here. And it's called La Chitona, we call it, because of the name. Okay, so to me, this is probably the most delicious citrus I can ever think about. And every time I get this, and then again, you smell this smell, pass this around, and put a finger and smell it. Smell this, you're not gonna find this anywhere in any supermarket anywhere. And smells like something you never smelled before. And that's when you start thinking like, if I tell you this is like the taste of my childhood, please have a taste. And when you taste it, it's like, you're expecting a lime, you're expecting something sour, and you say like, it doesn't have any flavor. And the same thing, I can tell you, the first time that Iraqi refugees came to the Mission Garden and they saw this fruit, they went crazy. They thought, oh my gosh, I'm at home. Because whenever you're cooking something and you need sourness, you think of lemons because that's what you have been grown up with. Most people in the world don't have lemons. They have sour oranges. In the Philippines, they have calamunda. Filipino people do not think about limes. They don't think about oranges. They think about calamunda. You want to make anything, it's calamunda. It's all cultural. It's all depending on where you come from. These are sour like limes. These are not loquats. I'm sorry, kumquats. These are calamondai. They're very calamondai. Yeah. Kumquats are different. Kumquats are elongated. These are spherical. Kumquats are sweet. The rind is sweet. The inside is sour. Okay. So that's just to show you the diversity of citrus that correspond to cultural values from different parts of the world, whether you're Northern European or whether you're Mediterranean. Again, you see this, what the heck is that? Is that a grapefruit? No, it's not. It's a very sweet fruit called sidra. Sidra in Spanish, or pomelo in English. But it's pomelo. But it's not a grapefruit. It's a different fruit. And anyways, and we can go on and on and on, whether you think of Meyer lemons or you think of Mexican sweet limes or Mexican limes for margaritas. It's just you have to open your mind and say, there are many more things that you grew up with or the things that you can find in the supermarket. That's the bottom line. And that opens up to culture, that opens up to recipes, that opens up to other parts of the world that it may not be your culture. That's the essence of that. So sugarcane, the cocaine of the 1700s. It's been grown here forever. From Sonora to Baja California, there's places in Sonora that we still have the horse-run trapiche, where you can actually put the sugarcane and turn it into juice and then turn it into a piloncillo and make natural sugarcane candy out of it. And this is a variety that I brought from Baja California. Look at that. It's green and purple at the same time. We call it caña pinta. And we're growing this at the Mission Garden as well.
They just harvested some like Mission Garden.
Mm-hmm. So you eat it? But maybe it wasn't. Well, there's a lot of river cane. There's a lot of type undisposed that you could have seen or not. Very likely it wasn't. Very cost sensitive, so very likely it was not grown there. And of course, familiar with, whether you have tortillas or bread or waffles or cereal that you have, so it comes from wheat. We've been growing Sonoran white wheat, the Mission Garden, for over a decade now. Look at the size of the wheat. It's almost as tall as I am. This tall when it's ripe. You go to any wheat growing area in the United States or Ukraine, you can even go to any world. The wheat is this tall. When it's finished, when it's ripened. Because it's genetically altered. They don't need horses and animals to harvest it anymore. So it's been genetically altered to reduce all that growth. This would have been feed to the animals. It would have been hay to build adobes, to build things. It's like a whole ecological aspect surrounding the use of everything else. Houses would have been made with that. We don't do that anymore, so now it's a waste. So we don't need it. So that's where you grow wheat that is this tall and you harvest it with machines. And then, of course, there are so many other things of the Mission Garden that incorporate the ecology. Chiltepines. We have wild chiltepines growing right here in Arizona. There's at least people non one of the hottest, and it's a huge commodity around. You go to any Mexican restaurant or any Mexican house, and you're going to find a chiltepín and a chiltepinero. This is the mesquite grinding thing that you put the chiltepines in there, you grind them, and then you put them in your food. Okay, you never touch them.
Jesus, is that the original pepper that other peppers are derived from?
It's considered, people often refer, and you hear a lot of people saying it's the mother of all peppers. In a way it is, because it's a non-domesticated variety of chili peppers that needs no human intervention. So it only is propagated by itself. It's propagated by birds. It's propagated by, are we running out of food? That. Okay. So this pepper, it can grow by itself. It can reproduce by the help of birds or other animals. And we have populations in Arizona doing extremely well. in certain protected areas and riparian areas. So that's an example that, yes, and if you mess around with them, if you grow them in a regular basis, you can transform these peppers. You can make them bigger. You can make them elongated. You can play with the gene pool yourself. You think, evolution and domestication, it was only done many years ago, far away and long ago. No, if you put your mind to it and you grow them every year and you keep selecting things, you can manipulate this very genetic material, this germplasm, and turn them into some other peppers that you've never seen before by selecting every time you plant them. Anyway, so that's just an idea. And then, of course, we got a little bit of fame last year when Top Chef came to Tucson. I don't know if any of you ever watched Top Chef. It's a big, huge national, I mean, international show. And not this last season, but I think the one before, it was called Top Chef Houston. Most of the program was in Houston. And the last two, they came to Tucson. I think we stole the show in a way because it turned out really, really fun. I think people really liked it. So it was kind of fun. They came to the Mission Garden and we taught them. These were the last two finalists. I'm sorry, the last four. And I had the privilege to participate as a judge, and we helped eliminate one of them. So there were three at the end. And I don't know if I want to spoil it for you, but tell you who won. But they were really fun. They were all paying attention and learning. So they used all these ingredients to make these desert foods incorporating native ingredients. And it was kind of fun. So probably my biggest claim to fame is I got to hang out with Aunt Mai. I don't know if you know who she is, but she is the main host. And I think she used to be a supermodel. So, and then we have things like okay, here you have a Native American product, a squash, corns, beans, or weeds and other things. What do you do? How do you process them? So here's when the cultural and traditional knowledge comes into the picture. You have a big squash, but maybe because you had a nice garden, maybe you have 10 or you have 15. Then what do you do with it? That's another those of you that are hardcore gardeners, you know that. You get a lot of stuff and then you don't know what to do with it. You were successful, exactly. So how do you do? So then you learn to process them in a way that whether you use the seeds for something or you use the squash in other ways. This is called bichikoris. This is something that I grew up with. You get the squash, you peel it, and you cut it into a spiral, into a long strip, and then, oh, that's another picture with Pat. And that is Maria Mason. She's a local chef that I think she participated in another. I don't think she won, but she was part of it this time. So yeah. And so you turn that big squash and you turn it into this spiral, you peel it, and then you let it dry. So you have to watch it, you have to know what you're doing. Then you hang it like in a clothesline until it's the consistency changes, and then you can store it for months and months and months. No refrigeration. And then you can rehydrate it, and then you can make squash soup, you can make candy, you can make anything you want. But that's the type of knowledge that goes along with the crop and the people, okay? So, and this is the concept of, actually, that's another thing, the concept of growing, you have the squash, that's the same as squash, and you know what to do with them. You can store them for as long as you can, and then you process them, yep. The birds won't eat them. No, well, you watch it, you want to make sure that, but yeah, normally they won't, and you have more than one. So anyway, so now let's just keep going now a little bit of a couple of other cultural aspects. Yes. Excuse me? Yes. Is this a winter squash or summer squash? I think this is considered, I really don't understand the concept of winter squash and summer squash. Because one you grow in the summer and you eat it in the winter, the other one you grow in the winter and you eat it in the summer. I really don't know what the difference. These are squash that you grow in the summer. So I would call it summer squash, but for most people, these are considered winter squash. I don't know. Native Americans did not have winter crops yet. If you look at the agriculture of Tohono O'odham here, they didn't grow things in the winter. They depended on weeds and foraging and other things, but actual winter crops, they were brought by the Europeans. So is there any other type of squash that you grow in the winter? And when do you grow them? When do you plant them? When do you harvest them? Uh-huh. Okay. Winter squash. Well, this would be kind of the same. If these are grown with the summer rains. You plant them in June or the end of June, July, when the rains come. That's the traditional way. You grow them through July, August, September, and you harvest them again September, October, and then they last through the winter. So that would be considered a winter squash, I guess. Yeah, but because I mean, it depends just a little earlier and depends because really the growing season here is the summer, not the spring. It's the summer when the rains are. This squash would grow with no irrigation, whatever the rains come. Now we can, of course, but they depended on the rainy season exclusive, which in this case meant end of June, July, August through September. That's it. So, they have different names. In Spanish, we call them calabaza arota. That would be the Spanish name. In English, often just people say Indian squash. The autumn name is had. That's the name for the autumn name. And I think you spell H-A column L. L is pronounced like an R, had. So, okay, just a quick little cultural mix here. Everybody knows that, of course. That's loteria, the Mexicans bingo game type thing. El nopal. So that's the prickly pear cactus. And this is something very, very unique because we're getting into several projects right now that incorporate the concept of understanding prickly pear a little better than you do, than we all do now. So this is the Mexican flag. Right now it's green, white, and red. And then you have the eagle thing in the middle, which is quite complex. See, we have a golden eagle eating a rattlesnake on top of a prickly pear on an island on a lake. In case you didn't know that. This is an oak, and I think this is an olive. It's a little bit of a mix here of European and, you know, okay, so these are actually acorns, supposed to be acorns. But yeah, you say, well, that's a Mexican flag, fine. Until you start looking at it from an ethnobotanical perspective. Okay, like, okay, so that's an eagle. And often bird watchers ask, okay, what species of an eagle is it? Many people even say that it's a crested caracara. Well, it's really not. In most images, it most resembles a golden eagle than anything else because it's this big, fearful animal. And then, of course, it's a fearful rattlesnake. And then, yes, it's on top of a prickly pear, and that simplifies an island, and that's Lago Texcoco, which is in Mexico City. But what caught my attention once I started looking at prickly pears, I said, well, what kind of a prickly pear is that? Well, so try to get a little closer. And as you find different renditions of the symbol, so here you have your kind of olive leaves, oaks, there's the lake, the island, the prickly pear. And then I thought, well, how can I figure out what this prickly pear is? But let's look at the flowers, the fruit. And it turns out that the more I look at these fruits, these are not really fruits. Those are flowers. And then I'm thinking, well, what prickly pear have flowers like that? And of course, in my travels and gone to different places in Baja California, in southern Mexico, and those of you that have cactus collections, you start looking at, yes, there are some prickly pears that are very different from the local prickly pears. And that puts us into this concept right here. This is the typical opuntia flower. And that corresponds to any prickly pear that you see in Tucson, domesticated or not. That's the typical flower, that's the pattern of the flower. But then there's this other one. That's the flower, and it has, the petals are completely different. The stamens stick out through the center, and that's in full bloom. And that's what represents in the flag. And it turns out that this is a different genus. This is Nopalea. This is Opuntia. This is Nopalea. The great majority of prickly pear are Opuntia. That's the genus. This one happens to be Nopalea. That's where the word nopal comes from. And that is a very tropical prickly pear. Does not grow naturally here. I have it. People have it in their yards. You find it at the Desert Museum. You find it in botanical gardens. But it's very frost sensitive. It's fast growing, and it turns into a tree. At the Mission Garden, you can go find it. That'll be your scavenger hunt. Go find it. It's a beautiful. In the last 6 years that it's been growing there, it has developed a trunk like a tree. Pretty cool. Spineless, but not glockless. It has lots of glockets, but it's spineless, yes. And it's very delicious, very tasty, very, 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 very delicious. It's very small, hardly any. If you look at the amount of glockets that they would have, they're very easy to clean, much faster and very tasty, not as acidic. No, the Burbank cactus, it would be more like this. I'm going to show you. It's more like this. It's like this one. That's the Burbank. I'll show you in a second. So, and that would be the same thing. So now we're getting into a prickly pear that is all over Tucson. And you've seen it in the streets. You see it, on the medium of the streets. You see them in people's houses. You see them everywhere. And you see these big, huge cactus coming out of people's backyards, and you just see them and nobody knows anything about it. Because again, may not be your culture. But those of us who grew up with this has been our food for a long, long time. I grew up eating this stuff. And again, if you go to South Tucson, you go to Food City, you go to El Super, you go to all the Hispanic stores, you can find these foods. It's a huge market for it. But the majority of Tucson does not know that. Okay, this is where the cultures don't come together. So you go to my house, I have about 6 or 7, 15 feet tall. They're growing among the quinces and the pomegranates, and they are 15 feet tall. That's how tall they are. And yes, they do a lot of fruit. This fruit is fully ripe, almost overripe. Here's again the concept. If it's not red, it's not ripe. But who told you that? Because that's how we grew up. That's the concept that we have, the fruit should be red. Well, that's not the case. Of course, you can eat as nopalitos, and I brought some samples right here. So this is again the Opuntia ficus indica, also known as Indian fig cactus, a little dried up, because that's the only one I had there. I didn't have a chance to grab another one. But these are the nopalitos, which are the young tender pads that come out of that. And when you harvest them, you clean them. Yes, they do have a few little spines and glockets, but when you harvest them and clean them, they look like this. And you can literally just eat them like this. Pass them around so you can start tasting. These are raw, just like this. They have a very lemony taste, almost like a green bean. But when you saute them in olive oil, you saute them with, you can eat them with scrambled eggs. You can eat them with chile colorado. You can eat them with anything else. This is a normal food, and it's in your backyard. You can make salsa with them. You can make salads. You can make all kinds of things. And if you're not growing them, you can go buy them at Food City, because that's how they sell them. They can sell them unclean. You can buy them clean, but not cut. You can buy them cut like that, or you can buy them canned and pickled. It's a huge market of this. How come you didn't know that? Well, because you need to go to the south side a little more often. Okay? Yes? No, this is Nopalea. We left that alone. This is Ficus indica, which is the large spineless prickly pear. Some people call it Burbank. You're eating this one. This, the same. It's the same. It's the now, remember the picture that I showed with the bright red fruits and the big spines? That is the native variety that is all over the mountains. Keep that in mind. Do not mix them up. Everything that you see in the Tucson Mountain, which you might have in your yard, is very low, pale, long spines with the red fruit in August. That's not what I'm talking about. That is Opuntia Engel. That's not this. That's Opuntia engelmani. That's the Engelmann's prickly pear. Nothing to do with this. You could eat those, and you're not gonna die. But it's so much work. There's so much spines and so much oxalic acid and so many glockets that it's not worth it. That's the reason people start domesticating these varieties that are easier to clean, no oxalic acid, or just slightly lemony, clean, wonderful taste, easy to clean, easy to grow, fast growing. That's the domestication side thing. No, they are slimy to begin with. When you clean them, if you wash them, if you add water, you're gonna make them more slimy. There are many ways. You can go to YouTube and learn ways to do it. Yes, all cactus are slimy, and slime is good for you. If you don't like slime, it's your problem. Good. The reason desert foods are slimy is because they live in this environment. They have to have this way of preventing evapotranspiration from the environment. So not only you find out that these beans are a little slimy. You find out because that is, and that's the reason they are low glycemic levels, because they have to live in this environment. By the way, let me start passing around some beans. Let me start with before I get into more into the prickly pear, so everybody has a chance to taste them. Right?
Okra slime.
Like okra slimy, yes. But if you learn how to cook them, you can control that. Yes, and then make them non-slimy at all. It's just finesse in the cooking part. So, and speaking of sliminess, let me pass this too. So let me show you really quick. This is the yellow palo verde, and if you don't know what they are, that's your homework. You can find out which one is the yellow, which one is the blue. There's 5 species of palo verdes in here in the Sonoran Desert. The most common ones are blue and yellow. Yellow is also known as foothills palo verde or little leaf palo verde. Parkinsonia microphylla. It's the palo verde that you see all over the Tucson Mountains, everywhere all over the Tucson Mountains. The blue palo verde, you tend to see more in town. It's often in riparian areas. It's taller and it's bluish, and there are less of them. This is more abundant. These were harvested in their prime when they were just fully ripe, and then I blanched them, like I said. I think I put a teeny bit of salt, blanched them for 5 or 10 seconds. So, and then I froze them. And every time I have a class, I just pull some in, like right now. So keep this in mind. The blues, they're both like edamame. But the blues, you could either like edamame, like just put them in your mouth, but don't do that because the bean itself, the pod, is bitter. So you have to do it by hand. This comes out really easy because you take the little beans out, don't touch that with your mouth, and then eat the beans. They're sweet. And they're juicy because they were, and of course you can eat them in the season too.
Better tasting.
You tell me. It's all about you. What do you make from better? Now these, the yellow, you can do it like edamame. You can literally put it in your mouth and squeeze it out. Take the little bean out, throw away the bean, and those will be just fine. Or you can peel them with your fingers as well as you like.
So the husks aren't bitter.
No, the yellow one doesn't have it's not bitter. Yeah. So just keep that in mind. Okay, I'm gonna put the blue here, the yellow one here. Okay. So, and these are from last season, so they might be a teeny bit dry, the yellow ones, but you have a chance. So you have a chance to taste them. And of course, if you make an effort to eat them in the season, then you get them as fresh as possible off the tree into the pot. Okay, put them in a pot of rice, in a salad, 3-bean salad, you name it.
So nice. Right up through the Palo Verde, right?
Mostly, in most cases. They help you show that most saguaros have to have a nurse plant. And typically the nurse plant is the palo verde. Could have been a mesquite, could have been ironwood, could have been other bushes, but typically they coexist more with palo verdes. Yes, and also it's a tree that lives longer, and also they just coexist in a little. A lot of the bushes may die before that, or eventually the saguaro has very shallow roots, so some of those plants may not make it. They tend to coexist because they have similar ways of surviving. All the time, rain or no rain, the palo verdes will bloom. In the calendar that I was showing you, the Tejano autumn calendar, March and April are called the yellow month. Of course, it doesn't correspond to 1 month, but it's called the yellow month because the Sonoran Desert is full of yellow flowers, most of them composites, and in palo verdes and brittle bush, and it's just what you get. In some cases, depending on the year, you may have more fruit than others, but they're always going to bloom. And some years the blooms are fascinating, amazing. So it will vary from year to year, but that's a given every year. Period. So, okay, so let's just quickly move into the varieties of prickly pear that I'm working on. So in recent years, through the Desert Museum, we've been little by little working on this idea of understanding wild or domesticated crops that are adapted to arid conditions. So we're calling it arid adapted crops. You've heard all over the news, yes, the Colorado River is drying, agriculture is having trouble, and this is no news. I mean, it's gonna happen. It's happening already. We know that. Again, nobody talks about overpopulation and all those things, but that's a different story. But we have a crisis and it will increase, and it's already been happening in other parts of the world, including in Mexico, where people are already starting to have conflicts because of water. We're just getting into it right now. Okay, so what is the alternative? We'll start growing crops that don't require a lot of water. And the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, has been things that people have been growing already for millennia. Why do we have to reinvent the wheel? Well, people have been doing this in Mexico for millennia. All you have to do is just adopt those strategies and do it here. And it's an uphill battle because the culture that we're dealing with is a Modern Eastern Anglo-European culture that dominates agriculture, that dominates the system, and seeing indigenous Mexican agriculture as an inferior way of life. So that's what we are navigating through. And what are we doing? Simply finding out what are the varieties of prickly pear that you can grow in your backyard, or can this be grown in an industrial level? This is just the Mission Garden last year, the different varieties of prickly pear, and they are all ripe. Some of them are actually overripe, okay? And we have right now at least 25 different species, 25 different varieties of Ficus indica growing right now with different flavors, textures, colors, you name it. So, and that's what they look like. So they come in different shapes, different colors, different sizes, super delicious, tremendous amount of sugar. We're measuring the bricks. We're measuring how much sugar every fruit has. What can it be used for? Can you make syrup? Can you make wine? Can you make beer? Can you make ferments? Can you make sauces? Can you eat them fresh? It's just an endless thing. Can you dehydrate them and turn them into dry fruit? Or can you do all kinds of things? You know, alcohol, whatever, you name it. And this is an example when I told you that not all fruits have to be sweet. This is an example that you can go to Food City right now or El Super, and you ask for choconostle, and they're going to tell you and they're going to show you this plant. This is a prickly pear fruit that is being selected not for the fruit, not for the fruit. It's selected for the rind. And you can make stews. It's actually lemony. It's like lemon. It's like acidic. You can make amazing salsas. Instead of a tomatillo sauce, like a green tomato type tomatillo sauce, you make it with choconostle. And now think about, citrus are not from the Americas. Citrus are not from here. What were people doing for lemon when they needed to cook something acidic? Well, there's tons of cactus that would provide you that. And there's still a market right here in Tucson that you can go and buy choconostle and put something in your salad. Or actually, I didn't bring here, but I have some barrel cactus fruits that you can also use as lemon in a salad, and you don't have them if you don't have it. Okay. So, and that's one time we were harvesting, you know, prickly pear fruit. This is the local prickly pear fruit by the Desert Museum property. There happened to be one that, of course, is not hard. It's just two fruit oddly growing together. It looks hard. So, this is some of the projects that I have going on right now. I'm growing, like I said, 25 varieties of prickly pear, 25 varieties of agaves, and messing around to figure out how long it takes to grow, where can they do better, which ones are more prone to disease, which ones need water. All of this, by the way, with irrigation. You think, oh, succulents and cactus, they're desert plants, they don't need anything. Well, they're not going to give you fruit. You want fruit, you want growth, you irrigate them, but not as much as almonds or peaches or anything else, or grapes or everything else. So depending on the circumstances, you can manipulate that and yes. So, and then quickly, just to end, another fascinating story which brings into the world of agaves. Over the years, archaeologists started finding things like this in archaeological sites, particularly in Arizona. And at the beginning, people didn't know what that was. Just little wads of fiber. And they were all over the place. And they named them quids. And it took them a while, I think, to figure out what they were. It turns out that they're actually shoot up agave fibers. And the story goes, of course, learning through archaeology, the people here in this part of the world have been harvesting and planting and cultivating agave for thousands of years. Several varieties, several species.
So the term quid pro quo.
Oh, good question. Good. I don't know, it's the same point. I don't know, good question. Good question. So again, we do have at least 6 species of agaves growing all over Tucson, mostly in landscapes, and people just see them as a landscape plant. But these plants were very useful through millennia for food and sources of everything, not only alcohol and ferments, but food and sugar. So again, all we have to do is just turn our head south, go south of the border, or back in the past, 100 years ago, Tucson had his own label of bacanora, of mezcal in the 1800s here in Tucson. And that again has been forgotten because it's been suppressed again. This new culture comes in, whatever remnants of Hispanics doing anything traditional is gone and disappearing. So my job has been to dig those up, not only the Hispanic culture, but the Native American culture, bring it afloat to say, okay, there's a lot to learn in here. We just have to dig it out. And that includes projects that 8 years ago, again, I grew up in Magdalena, Sonora. My father was a mezcalero in the 1940s, and he had to be hiding from the authorities. The prohibition, as you know it in the United States, it also affected Mexico. In the same way, the prohibition of drugs right now in the United States is affecting Mexico right now. The prohibition of marijuana, the prohibition of all the drugs that are consumed in the United States are affecting Mexico directly because that's where the drugs come from, or they pass through, and laws and money goes back and forth. If you go to Mexico right now and you're traveling north, you have to go through several checkpoints with soldiers and Mexican soldiers checking you out, and you think, oh, these darn Mexicans are checking me and see where I'm coming. Not the Mexicans. It's the US doing that. The US is paying the Mexican government to put those checkpoints all over Mexico so those drugs don't make it to the US. And they still do. So this prohibition of alcohol in the 1930s affected Mexico all the way to the 1980s in Mexico. My father was making mezcal in the mountains. It had to be hiding. You were put in jail and somebody will kill you if they found you making mezcal. So having that knowledge and growing up with that aspect of, I mean, in the kitchen table, grew up eating mezcal, like the roasted agave, and talking about it. So I always was curious, can I do it? So, and that's what I've been doing for the last 8 years. At the Mission Garden, we started creating the whole process, making the oven, harvesting the agaves, figuring out what agaves we could use, and making a very small oven that doesn't require a lot of work. It's like a 4 feet by 3 feet wide. And one person in a few minutes, we can put the coals, and then in the meantime, we also teach what to do with the fibers. Once the agave is cooking, we teach about the different aspect of how an agave leaf can be turned into fibers, and it can be turned into materials like bags. It can be turned into sandals, you name it. So that whole process is part of the idea of how byproducts of agave can be used for teaching children how to make rope, how to make porridge with the fibers. And then learning from elders who, in this case, were learning how to make horsehair rope that equally translates to making agave rope, which is called ixtle, and the materials used for making ropes that people have been doing it for a long, long time. These tools that I grew up with, my father would tell me how to make these tools. These are the tools that are used to make rope. And if we have a chance, we'll do a little demonstration later. And so Native people, this is the Kumeyaay lady from Baja California that they still make. This sandal was made by her. These are the Kumeyaay people in northern Baja California. And then when 2 days later, we uncover the pit and the agaves are cooked, and we take them out and demonstrate what it's like to eat a roasted agave. This is something that Native Americans have been eating for millennia, right here in Arizona. The question is, what species have they been eating? How do they cook them? What do they do with them? How do they process them? How do they preserve them? And that's the process that we've been continuing to learn by doing. So we taste them, we eat them, and we've made ferments. We actually made some spirits. We are experimenting. And every year, as you probably have heard, there is an Agave Heritage Festival. That's the same thing we created early on. We created a Quince Festival. We created a Pomegranate Festival. We created a Citrus Festival. We're creating almost this a way to teach people all the different things you can do with this crops. And given that whole deep history that I just told you, from Native Americans to the present, the story of immigrants coming and going, Tucson, over 5 years ago, became the first city of gastronomy in the United States, designated by the UNESCO. And then later on, San Antonio, also Ensenada, Baja California, and Mexico are cities of gastronomy. So that's created this craze right now for gastronomy and foods. It's all related to all those things that I just told you. The Mission Garden was critical to designate Tucson a city of gastronomy, given the history and deep history of foods in this region. So, thank you for your attention, and I hope you learned something new. Please come and taste. Before you go, I want to give you a couple other tastes. I want you to taste the ironwood. So these, again, you can eat them like edamame. Also, just open them up. These are fresh, and these are cooked with a little bit of salt. This is, to me, as close as you can get to edamame. And juicy, succulent. 10 seconds. No, don't need the pad. You can if you want to. It's not going to be pleasant. Yes, you can. I mean, if you have a dry, I don't know if I have a dry, when they are dry, you can let them dry and then